Hey everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here from GeekCast Radio, doing another graphic thoughts video where I go through some of the recent graphic novels I've been reading, and give you my thoughts and opinions on them. Today I have quite a range of books actually to talk about, a lot of variety in today's video, so that should make it somewhat fun. First starting with an actual manga title with Golosseum Volume 1, and I'm not hugely versed in the world of manga. I've read a few things here and there, but really less than a handful, trying to read more, expand that palette of comic book reading. And so I picked this up because it was very new. And the premise of this is that this new invention called the Peacemaker is created, and what it does is it renders all weapons useless. Everything from a gun to a nuclear weapon. If it's human made, it no longer works. But what does work is physical contact, punching and kicking, and throwing people to the ground. So if you put two and two together, what does that mean? Well, they have martial arts now to utilize in order to keep the peace. So it is also very much a caricature of real life politics. As you can see in the cover, that is President Putinov. I'm not sure exactly where they got that name from, but yes, the Russian president does play a key role in this. And right from the start, it kind of lets you know what it's about, as Putinov karate chops the head off of Tiger. It's like, okay, clearly we know the direction it's going. As someone's not super versed in the world of manga, it's hard for me to know where does parody start and where does like regular normal tropes within the world of manga begin. It's just parodying those, or it's just a part of them. I'm not I'm not versed enough to give that answer, but I can say it is insane in a good way. It does get a lot of fun. I will say though, by the end, you do have some crazy martial arts action. Throwing someone to the ground becomes like the key move to knocking them out, because it is like one of the biggest weakness of these gigantic human soldiers. Also, as you can see there, a big part of this is Rasputin is a huge catalyst to all this as well. It seems like anything that's dealing with Russia, it's either Putin or Rasputin, and in this case, it's both. America also has its own super soldier that it has, and you can even see that is President of the United States is, what is exactly her name? Billionaire Quintone. So there you go. I can't tell when it might have been before the election. But the America's super soldier is this guy who is obviously Hulk Hogan-esque. He even says, brother, and what are you going to do? Say your prayers. And it's like Hulk Hogan taking more steroids than he took in the 80s. By the end, though, it's fun, it's enjoyable, but eventually it does wear thin. At least it did for me. And I was just like, okay, this is crazy and insane. And but it gets to a certain point where it just has to keep trying to top itself more and more. And it ends up not being able to do that. So I just ended up getting kind of bored by it by the end. And there's going to be another volume of it. I don't know if I'll pick that up, just because I feel like I got my full. I just don't know if there's much more they can add to this that wasn't in this. The story to me wasn't like what the selling point was. It was just the insanity of it. But by the end, that insanity kind of did what it needed to do. And I was like, all right, well, that's enough for me. But if you are a huge manga fan and this is the type of story that you enjoy, this might work for you much more than it did for me. But I would say it's at least worthy of recommend, worthy to kind of peruse through and see if you enjoy it. And like I said, I did have some fun with it. So there's that. On a different, completely other end of the spectrum, I actually have an all ages title with The Prince and the Dressmaker. And when I first started reading this, I was a little concerned. I'm like, we see this dressmaker who she makes a dress for a client, and she goes against the parents' wishes, and she does what the actual daughter wants to do, and she creates this crazy looking dress that is unlike anything else. And this takes place, doesn't really give a time frame, but I would say like maybe the Victorian era or something of that nature. But it's very, a very conservative type of era, and the dress she makes is not that. And the prince sees this and invites her into work at the actual castle. And I'm like, okay, I can see what's happening here. She's going to start working there. She's going to become the princess herself or something of that nature. And everything is going to come from that. Like, we've seen this story before, but that's not the case at all. What ends up happening actually is that it's called The Prince and the Dressmaker because the dressmaker actually begins to make dresses for the prince. This character, and that is here, the silhouette, is actually the alter ego the prince begins to, well, not even alter ego, it's kind of who he ends up envisioning himself as after some of these dresses are made. They end up going out, and he dons this persona to try to hide who he is in one sense, but really become who he truly is in another. And at the same time this is going on, you have, there you can see him, and right away he becomes a star, and it has to be very secretive because no one else can know. Only people that know this is happening. As you can see, the dressmaker is like hidden from knowing, and she knows, and the prince's assistant knows, but his parents don't know. No one else knows, because at the same time the parents are trying to find a wife for the prince, bringing on different princesses from around the world, having them have dinners and things of that nature, trying to build up some chemistry because he needs to get married to another princess someplace to kind of keep the kingdom from growing. And it's taking that typical arranged marriage storyline and adding in some modern day layers to it. And by the end of it, I was actually like rather impressed by the story and its message. Very good all ages title in the sense of it has a message that I think is universal. It's important for kids as well as adults. As a father, I can read this and learn something. And I think as a son, if I give this to my son, he could read this and learn something that's a little bit different, but very much connected to it as well. And, I was really impressed mostly with the relationship actually between the prince and his father, the king, he looks like this big brawny dude. He's got, trying to pull up a photo of him. He looks like almost like a Viking in a way. And, again, thinking that, trying to get ahead of the story and saying, okay, well, I see where this is going. I see what the relationship's going to be like once he finds out what his son is doing. But it ends up being much more nuanced than that. And you can see him, like he very much cares for his son, and he understands that he may have some problems with some of the princesses, but he generally wants what's best for him, even if that is something he doesn't truly understand at times, what the prince wants. But I find it just a very good example of the importance of being who you are and the challenges that come with it, and the challenges of hiding who you are and the damage it can do to yourself and people around you, but also knowing that just because you put yourself out there doesn't necessarily mean the world's going to accept you, but in a way, it's the only way you can accept yourself. And I found it rather moving and important and well told, but I felt like the message never got above the actual storytelling. It was part of it. It was there, but it wasn't the star of the show. I think the characters that were there first, the prince and the dressmaker, I think they have a really great bond that develops, and I like the direction that goes as well. So one of the better all ages books I've read all year, and I could easily see this being up for an Eisner next year for best all ages title, for sure. So would definitely recommend that, especially if you have a son or a daughter that's looking for a book to get into. I think you're kind of sick and tired of the same type of Disney story. This is, I think, a good example of how to take that story that we've seen time and time again and modernize it in a more interesting way. Talking about modernizing stories, or at least taking them in different directions. I also have My Boyfriend the Bear. And what's kind of funny about this is a few things. When I picked this up, I'm like, it's not the idea of My Boyfriend the Bear to me sounds like a Simpsons parody of an SNL skit. And thinking like, okay, like how is this going to go? Is it going to be super quirky? Is it going to be ridiculous? Is this bear going to like talk and be like Yogi the Bear or something of that nature? But no, it's not that. It is a bear. It is a bear, but with some human-like qualities. As you can see, they're out to dinner and he's got a suit and tie. But at the same time, he has a lot of bear-like qualities. He doesn't talk. He doesn't communicate well. He does love to eat the trash. He has the same type of appetite. He hibernates and all that great stuff. But it's just ends up being what's weird about it is that by the end of it, even though it's a ridiculous premise, this idea of this bear and this bear and woman having a relationship, cuddling. He's a great cuddler, which you think bears would be great cuddlers. But it's this ridiculous relationship. But in a way, it ends up working better than some real life human to human relationships in many stories. And I think it gets into a lot of things, but I think mainly the challenges of relationships and very much how we as people tend to be very bad at communicating with one another, and how that, like, all relationships require work. And when she ends up actually, even similar to with the prince and the dressmaker, when she begins to let everyone know, her friends and family, that she's dating a bear, there's some rejection, and her friends don't understand it. They don't get it. Like, how does it make sense? It's like, how does this even work? And all the questions that would be in your head, they're asked and dealt with in different ways. So, and she has a dead end job. She works at this online company where basically tries to scam people out of money, and she's got a lot of challenges going on, and in a way, there's a lot of miserable things happening, but that makes this relationship somehow work even more, because it's like one of the brightest spots of her life, even though it is crazy. And as you can see, when they go to the zoo, for example, it causes some problems as you have a bear walking around the zoo. But so there's certainly a lot of humor. It's not taken straight at all. So there's certainly comedy in here, but I think it tries to utilize that to get to something tangible, for sure. I could see this not being for everyone because of the sense of humor, because some people would just be like, it just sounds stupid to me. But I think if you can let yourself buy into it and kind of get into really the message of what it's selling, I think it's actually quite good. And I think it's well written for sure. And I think it has some honesty into it. So definitely even though it is ridiculous in a sense, it's ridiculousness ends up being, I think, a more of a benefit than a burden by the end of it. So my boyfriend the bear. It's been, like I said, it's a huge variety of books, and then the next few titles are actually European books that were recently translated for American audiences, starting with Lights of a Mole. A mule? I can barely speak English, let alone any other language. But this is a fantasy story, and I love this book. The first and foremost thing that kind of took me is the art. This was actually made in the 90s, so it may look a little dated, but again, that's because it actually is dated. But it's about this fantasy land, and it kind of it's a world that was created between two gods. And I want to make sure I get the gods right. That they were this magician and oak tree, basically, and they kind of had a bet, and with that world, the world was created. This story focuses mostly on these limpids that are human-like, as you can see in the back, but they're not quite human, and ferrets as well. It starts off, and we see this ferret that's in an actual airplane flying across, and they crash land in this bayou, and eventually. See these, they're flying in a flying machine, and they crash land into a bayou with other ferrets, and they ended up escaping into going across other lands that were unknown to them, and kind of seeing this world more and more. And the thing that kind of had me thinking about was something like it's like an adult version of a Roald Dahl book, and because it's certainly, there's like nudity in this and stuff like this, so this is not like kid appropriate, but it certainly has that fantasy feel to it, and it does get really dark at times, and because there are these demon creatures that are threatening existence in the background as well. So it is there's a lot of story in this book, and I didn't think so, but the pages are packed with a lot of great dialogue and a lot of interesting creatures. But it does, I think, maybe go on a little tad too long for me, and it maybe sputters out a little bit. But by the time it gets to an end, it gets very like the story that it starts with and ends with seem very different. And excuse me. In just their tone and the creatures, at first I'm like, oh, this seems like a kid-like book in a way, like with some of the the ferrets and the limpids and the magical powers. But by the end, I'm like, oh no, this is not that at all. but it was good. It I don't know. I didn't love it, but it had some interesting ideas, I guess. I know not the greatest review in the world. The last one is actually probably of all the books I read. This is by far my favorite. Portugal, by Pedrosa, and this is a book about actually it's not a super uh, memoir, but it's like memoir inspired, about an artist that who was born in Italy or France. Sorry, he's born in France, but he is of Portugal descent, and well, his families are immigrants, and he goes back to Portugal for like a convention because he's an artist, and there he kind of reflects on life, and it kind of changes everything that he's doing, but he wants to change his direction in life, but he doesn't know where it is, so he ends up being kind of stalled out. So he ends up going across and just trying to figure things out. Um, Great art in this. It was painter like quality to it. Um, the only bad part I think about the art in this is that at times when it had like night sequences, it got a little hard to actually. It was too dark that we couldn't really see any detail. But it was hard to read. But it was very it's very low key. It reminded me a lot of like a Richard Linklater movie because much of it, especially the middle section, is just kind of people hanging out. The artist like breaks up with his girlfriend. He ends up going to this wedding of his cousin that he had been kind of estranged with some time, but his father's there too, and he's now communicating with family that he has been distant of in some time, but they're kind of coming closer and closer connected now that they're kind of stuck in one location, and the awkwardness of that. And even with his father, he's distant. There's even a scene where before they get into the wedding, he visited his father in Paris for a short period of time. He's like, actually, I got to go. I have to go catch my airplane. I don't have a lot that I don't have a lot of time to talk. So they end up talking for like 20, 30 minutes, if that. He gets to the airport and they're like, well, you have 4 hours until your plane leaves. So he purposely lied to his dad just because like he didn't want to have a communication or have a conversation with him for a variety of reasons, because there was something he needed to tell him. At the same time, though, I think it's just because like he just didn't know how to act or interact with his dad, but he later gets placed into a situation where he has no choice. So it just felt very human to me, in that sense, like knowing this is coming from probably somewhat of a true life situation, coming from someone's actual life story. I would say the middle does meander a little too much, where we are at this wedding and there's a lot of different characters. This family's huge and there's a lot of things going on. Like you have the grandmother who is becoming senile and that's becoming challenging, and you're seeing the effect it's having on the other family that's been living with her while much of the family hasn't been there. They've been out of sight, out of mind. And now that people are kind of realizing what's happening, so it's very slice of life. Not it's kind of, I think, doesn't paint the entire picture. To me, it's just kind of showing a culture, a world. The immigration piece is huge in this. These are people that their history and past is still there. Being Portuguese, even if living in France, they still, I think, feel like they were not truly connected to the land they're living in, and that they're always going to be kind of people of two lands, and with that, like never feeling home, or so. And I think that's kind of telling for kind of where we are now, because obviously we're dealing with a lot of refugees crisis, very different than this in the sense of these aren't people in peril or anything like that, but they're kind of generations removed from when that was the case, and how even decades later, even if the grandchildren of refugees still have a lot of that lingering with them, where they're still feeling like outsiders in some way. So I just found it a lovely tale, and very human in that sense. So definitely would recommend this. It is quite the read, though. Like, this took me some time. Of out of the books, probably the one that I took the most time with, partially because I mentioned some of those sequences where it was super dark to read. I felt like I had to go through a few times just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, because there's a lot on this page. Like, the cover is a good example of it. Like, this cover is like one panel. and then like there's a lot packed into all these different panels. The art was pretty impressive with just how detailed it was. So, but yeah, so those are kind of some of the recent books I've been reading as of late. I'm trying to catch up with some of the notable 2018 releases that have come out. So most of these are at least released for the first time in the U.S. Like this was first released in February of this year, though I think it actually is from last year because it was not. It was Eisner nominated, I believe, last year for Best International Material. And as I mentioned, this Lights from Nool, I think it was originally from the 1990s, but recently first adapted, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. At least this is what it said in the inside of the cover, that it was its first American edition. So I don't know if it was just through Eurocomics. This was done by IDW, published by. So I don't know. But I got all these from the library. So if you're looking to get into something, if any of these caught your eye, or you would want to learn more about them or read them, like I said, most of these are available at most local libraries. Out of all the ones that I picked and read, like I said, I think Portugal to me was the one that impacted me the most, that I got the most out of. The one that I think is probably going to have, I think, the biggest impact would be the Prince and the Dressmaker. I think this is I could see this being kind of sold at Scholastic and like selling a lot of copies, and this being really, really impactful for a lot of people, especially for a new generation. So I could see this becoming bigger and bigger as the year goes on. But ultimately, I think I would recommend all these to some extent, but with some caveats, especially with Golosseum. As I indicated, I think by the end of that, I was a little bit not as high on it. So, but that's it for graphic thoughts number 2. I will be back with more of these, and let me know how you're thinking. If there's any graphic novels that you're reading that I should check out, let me know in the comments below. But until then, remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.